I stood in the parking lot of the Bellevue Gardens Wedding Chapel, clutching the speech I'd written on lavender stationery, my daughter's favorite color since childhood. The carefully chosen words, now creased from my grip, would never be heard by the wedding guests inside. My own daughter had uninvited me from the most important day of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Wright, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had the kind of mother-daughter relationship other parents envied. My daughter Sophia and I had always been exceptionally close, especially after her father, Richard, passed away when she was just 11. For 15 years it had been just the two of us against the world in our modest home in Mapleton, a small town where everyone knows your business, but somehow misses the important parts. I worked as a high school art teacher, stretching my salary to provide Sophia with everything she needed: art classes, soccer uniforms, SAT prep courses, college application fees. I made it all happen, often by taking on extra weekend workshops or summer school sessions. Those additional hours meant less time together, but I believed the sacrifices were worth it to give her opportunities I never had. Every decision I made centered around Sophia's future. When she was accepted to Westlake University with a partial scholarship, I took out a second mortgage to cover the remainder of her tuition. "Mom, you don't have to do this," she'd protested, but I insisted. Education was non-negotiable in our household, a principle I'd ingrained in her since elementary school. "Your father would have wanted this," I told her, and it was true. Richard had been the first in his family to attend college. His accounting degree had secured our comfortable, if modest, lifestyle before pancreatic cancer took him at 42. Continuing his legacy through Sophia seemed like the most fitting tribute to the kind, ambitious man we both missed terribly. College transformed Sophia in ways I hadn't anticipated. She'd always been confident, but suddenly she became sophisticated. Her wardrobe shifted from comfortable hoodies to elegant blazers. Her childhood bedroom posters came down during winter break, replaced with framed black and white photography. She started straightening her naturally curly hair she'd inherited from me, and adopted a polished appearance I barely recognized. "It's just how everyone dresses in the business program, Mom," she explained when I commented on the changes. But it felt like more than clothes. Sometimes she'd correct my grammar during our phone calls or gently suggest more elevated restaurants when I visited campus. I told myself this was normal. She was finding her identity, expanding her horizons. Isn't that what college was supposed to do? Despite these small shifts, we remained close. Our Sunday night calls were sacred, an hour of catching up on everything, from her classes to campus gossip. I'd share town news, updates on her high school friends, and progress on the backyard garden I'd started after Richard died. She always asked about my students and remembered their names, their struggles, their small victories. "You're changing lives, Mom," she'd say, and my heart would swell with pride, both in her empathy and in knowing I'd raised someone who valued education as much as I did. During her junior year, our dynamic began to change when Sophia met Nathan Kennedy. Their connection was immediate and intense. Nathan came from a wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut. Old money, as they say. His father owned a chain of luxury hotels, and his mother chaired several high-profile charity boards. Sophia's voice changed when she talked about him, taking on a breathless quality I recognized from my own youth. "He's brilliant, Mom. His summer internship at Goldman Sachs is already guaranteed, and you should hear him talk about sustainable business practices. He's going to change things from the inside." I was happy for her, but worried too. Nathan sounded perfect, too perfect perhaps, and I wondered if Sophia felt pressure to match his background, his connections, his seamless navigation of privileged spaces. When I finally met Nathan during Parents' Weekend, he was impeccably polite, rising when I entered the restaurant, pulling out my chair, asking thoughtful questions about my teaching career. He was undeniably handsome, tall with dark hair, and the confident posture of someone who's never questioned his place in the world. I looked for cracks in his charm, signs of insincerity, but found none. By dessert, I understood Sophia's infatuation. Nathan had a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room when he focused his attention on you. "What do you think?" Sophia asked afterward, her eyes anxious for my approval. "He seems wonderful," I said honestly. "Smart, respectful. Your dad would have liked him." Her face relaxed. "That means everything to me, Mom." Later that weekend, Nathan invited me to dinner with his parents, who happened to be visiting campus at the same time. "They're eager to meet Sophia's mother," he said. "She talks about you constantly." I agreed, though anxiety gnawed at me as I rifled through my suitcase for something appropriate. Everything I'd packed suddenly seemed inadequate. Too casual, too colorful, too small-town art teacher. I settled on a navy dress I'd worn to a colleague's wedding, adding the pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary. The restaurant Nathan selected was the most expensive in the college town, with a wine list longer than the menu and waitstaff that moved like ghosts between tables. Victoria and Harold Kennedy were already seated when we arrived. Victoria rose to greet me, her handshake firm, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She wore a simple black dress that I immediately recognized as designer, though I couldn't have named which one. Harold's greeting was warmer, his handshake accompanied by a genuine smile that reminded me of Nathan's. "Eleanor. Finally, we meet. The woman who raised the remarkable Sophia. Nathan can't stop singing her praises." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dinner proceeded pleasantly enough, though I felt increasingly aware of subtle differences in our worlds. Victoria asked about my little town and teaching career with the faintest emphasis that transformed them into something quaint and slightly inferior. When I mentioned the community mural project I'd organized last summer, she nodded politely before steering the conversation toward the Kennedy Family Foundation's recent gallery opening in Manhattan. Harold seemed more genuinely interested, asking questions about my art background and educational philosophy. "Teachers are the unsung heroes," he said, raising his glass in my direction. "Sophia tells us you're quite beloved at your school." "Mom was Teacher of the Year twice," Sophia added, reaching for my hand under the table. The gesture comforted me. She was still my ally, even in this unfamiliar terrain. As dessert arrived, Victoria shifted to wedding talk, though Nathan and Sophia had been dating less than a year and weren't yet engaged. "When our daughter Amanda married, we had the ceremony at St. Thomas and the reception at the Greenwich Country Club," she said, examining her chocolate soufflé with a critical eye. "Family tradition, of course. The Kennedy men have been marrying there for generations." I noticed Sophia straighten slightly. "That sounds lovely," she said, her voice taking on the polished tone I'd started hearing more frequently. Victoria smiled. "Of course, we'd work with whatever traditions your family might have too, dear." The implication was clear. Whatever those traditions might be, they would be accommodated as a courtesy, not embraced. I felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. I was being oversensitive. This was just dinner conversation. When I hugged Sophia goodbye at the end of the weekend, she clung to me slightly longer than usual. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means everything having you meet Nathan's family." "Of course, sweetheart. They seem—" I searched for the right word. "Established." She laughed, understanding my diplomatic choice. "They're a lot, I know, but they're important to Nathan, so they're important to you," I finished. "I understand." That evening, as I drove the 3 hours back to Mapleton, I found myself thinking about Victoria Kennedy's perfectly highlighted hair, her subtle jewelry, her ease in that expensive restaurant. For the first time, I wondered if Sophia looked at me and saw all the ways I didn't measure up to that world. The thought sat heavy in my chest, but I dismissed it as insecurity. Sophia and I had weathered too much together for something as superficial as social class to come between us. 3 months later, Nathan proposed during spring break of their senior year. Sophia called me immediately, her voice vibrating with excitement. "Mom! Mom! He asked me to marry him. We're engaged!" My heart swelled with joy, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that Richard wasn't here to share this moment. "Oh, sweetheart. Congratulations. Tell me everything. How did he ask? Let me see the ring." She switched to video call, holding up her left hand to display a diamond that caught the light with blinding brilliance. It was larger than anything I'd ever seen outside of movies, set in platinum with smaller diamonds flanking it. It was his grandmother's, she explained. Victoria had it reset by their family jeweler in New York. "It's stunning," I said truthfully. "But more importantly, are you happy? Is this what you want?" Her eyes filled with tears. "More than anything, Mom. He's everything I've ever wanted." "Then I'm thrilled for you both," I said, blinking back my own tears. "Your dad would be so proud of the woman you've become." "I wish he was here," she whispered. "Me too, honey. Me too." We spent the next hour discussing potential dates and venues, though I sensed Sophia already had direction from Victoria on these matters. Still, it felt good to dream together, to share this milestone as we had so many others. "You'll help me find my dress, right?" she asked before we hung up. "Try and stop me," I laughed. "It's been my dream since you were born." The engagement period began joyfully. Sophia created a shared online folder for wedding ideas where we both pinned images of flowers, dresses, and decor. I took a weekend trip to campus to celebrate with her and Nathan, bringing along photo albums from her childhood for them to laugh over together. Nathan seemed genuinely interested in these glimpses of Sophia's early years, asking questions about family traditions and memories. "Your mom is amazing," he told Sophia, as we flipped through pictures of science fairs and dance recitals. "Look at everything she made happen for you." Sophia squeezed my hand. "She's the best. I wouldn't be who I am without her." That night, after Nathan dropped us at my hotel room, Sophia and I stayed up late talking like we used to, sprawled across the beds with snacks and tea. "Mom," she said suddenly, her voice serious, "I want you to know how much it means to me, that you'll be part of planning this wedding. I know the Kennedys can be overwhelming, but this is our day. Yours and mine too, not just Nathan's family's." "I'm honored to be included, sweetheart," I said. "And don't worry about the Kennedys. I can hold my own." She smiled, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Looking back, that was the first warning sign I should have heeded more carefully. The engagement bubble began to deflate shortly after graduation. Sophia and Nathan moved to Boston, where he started at his father's company, and she landed an entry-level marketing position at a prestigious firm. Wedding. Planning shifted from our shared online folder to a professional planner named Genevieve, hired by Victoria Kennedy. "It makes sense, Mom," Sophia explained during one of our increasingly brief phone calls. "Genevieve has connections with all the best vendors in Greenwich. She's done events for the Vanderbilts." "Of course," I agreed, swallowing my disappointment. "That's practical." Our Sunday calls became shorter and less consistent. Sophia often sounded distracted or would reschedule at the last minute. When we did speak, wedding details dominated the conversation, but increasingly as reports rather than consultations. "The ceremony will be at St. Thomas," she informed me one Sunday in October. "The Kennedys are all married there." "But you've never been religious," I said, confused. Richard and I had raised her with exposure to our different faith backgrounds, but ultimately let her make her own choices. She'd stopped attending any services in high school. "It's tradition, Mom. It's important to Nathan's family." I bit back my concern. "And the reception?" "Greenwich Country Club, of course. Victoria's secured the date for next June." Each call revealed another decision made without my input. The color scheme, ivory and gold, though Sophia had always loved vibrant colors. The music, a string, quartet instead of the eclectic playlist she'd once envisioned. The menu, traditional French cuisine rather than the fusion food she'd loved in college. When I gently asked if these choices reflected her preferences, her answers became increasingly defensive. "Things change, Mom. This is about creating something timeless, not just what I thought I wanted in college." By December, 6 months into the engagement, I'd been effectively sidelined from most planning aspects. Still, I held on to the promise of dress shopping. Sophia had mentioned January as the timeline, giving us plenty of time before the June wedding. 2 weeks before Christmas, I received an email from Sophia with an unusually formal tone. "Mom, just a quick update on wedding plans. Victoria has arranged an appointment with Vera Wang in New York next week. Her friend sits on the board with Vera, so we're getting special access to the new collection before it's available to the public. It's an incredible opportunity. Since it was such short notice and I know you have school, Victoria will accompany me for this initial appointment. I'll be sure to send pictures of anything promising. Love you, Sophia." My heart sank as I read and reread the message. Dress shopping, the one thing she'd specifically promised would be our moment, now co-opted by Victoria Kennedy. I drafted several responses, deleting each one. Finally, I settled on something supportive but honest. "Sweetheart, I must admit I'm disappointed to miss dress shopping with you, as it's something I've looked forward to since you were little. Is there any way to schedule a second appointment? When I could join? I could rearrange my classes with enough notice. I understand this is a special opportunity, though, and wouldn't want you to miss it. Please do send photos. I want to share in the experience as much as possible from afar." "Love you always, Mom." Her reply came several hours later. "I'll check about a follow-up appointment. Things are just moving quickly with the June date approaching. Try not to worry. You'll see the final choice before the wedding." I felt a strange detachment reading her words, as if they'd been written by someone else. The Sophia I knew would have understood how meaningful this milestone was to me. She would have insisted I be there, or would have rescheduled. This new version seemed to view my involvement as optional, my feelings as an inconvenience. When my phone rang a few days later displaying Sophia's number, I answered eagerly, hoping she'd reconsidered the dress shopping plan. "Mom." Her voice sounded unusually hesitant. "Do you have a minute to talk about the wedding?" "Always," I said, settling into my favorite chair, notepad ready as had become my habit during wedding discussions. "What's up?" "I've been thinking about the ceremony," she began, her words measured as if rehearsed. "About the traditions and roles." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Victoria mentioned that in Kennedy family weddings, it's customary for the father of the groom to escort mothers down the aisle. Both mothers. Since Dad isn't here, Harold would escort you." I frowned, puzzled by this non-issue. "That sounds fine, honey. I'm comfortable with that arrangement." Good, she said, but her tone suggested there was more. "And about the reception. Traditionally, there are just a few speeches. Best man, maid of honor, and father of the bride. Since Dad isn't with us, we were thinking." My heart lifted. "I'd be honored to speak in Richard's place, sweetheart. I've actually already started jotting down some thoughts." "Actually," she interrupted, "we were thinking Harold could give a welcome speech on behalf of both families. To keep things streamlined." The word felt like a slap. Streamlined, as if my words for my only daughter on her wedding day were excess to be trimmed. "I see," I managed, my voice unnaturally even. "And is that what you want, Sophia?" A pause stretched between us, filled with everything unsaid. "It just makes sense logistically," she finally replied, avoiding the actual question. "The planner is concerned about timing with the band and dinner service." I took a deep breath, fighting the tightness in my chest. "I understand practical considerations, but this is your wedding day. Surely there's room for your mother to say a few words." Another pause. "Mom, please don't make this difficult. We're trying to create a certain atmosphere. Victoria thinks—" "What Victoria thinks shouldn't matter more than what you think," I said, unable to maintain my composure. "Or what I feel as your mother." "That's not fair," Sophia said, her voice hardening. "The Kennedys are paying for most of the wedding. They have a vision for how these events should proceed." "And that vision doesn't include me speaking at my only child's wedding?" "You'll be there," she said, as if that were concession enough. "You'll be recognized in the program." "Recognized?" I repeated incredulously. "Like an acknowledgement." "In a book? Sophia, listen to yourself. This doesn't sound like you." "Maybe you don't know who I am anymore," she said coldly. "People grow up, Mom. They change." The words stung more than she could possibly know. Growing up doesn't mean discarding the people who raised you to fit into someone else's idea of what's appropriate. "This is exactly why Victoria suggested we go this route," she said, voice rising. "She knew you'd make it about yourself instead of what's best for my day." "Your day?" I echoed, tears forming. "I thought it was about celebrating your marriage with the people who love you most." "It is, but there are standards to consider. Appearances matter in Nathan's world, in our world now." "And I don't meet those standards," I said flatly. Her silence was confirmation enough. I closed my eyes, gathering strength. "Sophia, I have supported every decision you've made, even when you've excluded me from the planning process. I've kept quiet when you've chosen options that seem nothing, like the daughter I raised. But I draw the line at being treated as an embarrassment." "I never said you were an embarrassment," she protested. "You didn't have to. It's clear in every choice you've made since the Kennedys entered the picture." More silence, then a sigh. That sounded more annoyed than regretful. "I can't deal with this drama right now, Mom. Either you can support the wedding as planned or—" The unfinished threat hung between us. "Or what?" I asked quietly. "Or maybe it would be better if you weren't there at all." The words hit me like physical blows. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I didn't mean that," she backtracked quickly, but without conviction. "Yes, you did," I whispered. "And that's what breaks my heart." "Mom?" "No," I interrupted, finding my voice again. "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Do you actually want me at your wedding? Not out of obligation, not to check a box, but because you genuinely want me there?" The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "It's complicated," she finally said. 3 words that told me everything I needed to know. "Then let me simplify it for you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I won't attend where I'm not truly wanted. I love you too much to turn your wedding day into something tense or uncomfortable." "So you're not coming?" she asked, a strange note of relief in her question that cut deeper than anger would have. "That seems to be what you prefer," I said. Though I never imagined I'd be having this conversation with my daughter. "You're being dramatic," she said dismissively. "This is exactly what Victoria warned me about." "I'm being honest," I corrected. "Something that's been missing from our relationship lately." The conversation ended shortly after, without resolution or reconciliation. Sophia didn't ask me to reconsider. She didn't acknowledge the pain her words had caused. She simply said she needed to go. Nathan was waiting to take her to dinner with some important clients. I sat in my silent living room afterward, clutching my phone, wondering how we'd arrived at this point. The daughter who once couldn't sleep without my goodnight kiss now couldn't envision me speaking at her wedding. The girl who'd written, "Mom is my hero," in a fifth-grade essay now saw me as an inconvenience to be managed. But most devastatingly, my only child, the person I'd shaped my entire life around, had just uninvited me from her wedding, and she sounded relieved about it. That night, I pulled out albums full of Sophia's childhood photos, her gap-toothed elementary school smile, her awkward middle school years with braces and experimentally dyed hair, her radiant high school graduation, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. In each image, I searched for signs of the person she'd become, someone who could dismiss 2 decades of love and sacrifice to satisfy her future mother-in-law's vision of propriety. I couldn't find any warning signs, just a happy child who'd grown into a confident young woman, and somewhere along the way, had decided I no longer fit into the narrative she was creating for herself. As I finally drifted to sleep in the early morning hours, I made a decision. I wouldn't beg for inclusion. I wouldn't create drama. I would respect her choice, painful as it was. If Sophia wanted to rewrite her history to better align with the Kennedys' expectations, I couldn't stop her. But I also wouldn't pretend it didn't break my heart. The next day passed in a fog of grief and disbelief. I called in sick to school for the first time in years, unable to face my students with my emotions so raw. I alternated between tears and numbness, between checking my phone for messages that didn't come and wanting to throw the device across the room. By evening, I'd moved into a strange, calm acceptance. I wrote Sophia a brief email. Sophia. After reflecting on our conversation, I want to confirm that I understand your wishes. I won't attend the wedding since my presence seems to complicate, rather than enhance your day. Know that this changes nothing about my love for you. My door remains open whenever you're ready to rebuild what we've lost. I've transferred the money I'd saved for your wedding gift to your account. Use it, however. You see fit. No strings attached. I will always love you, Mom. I didn't expect a response, and none came. The silence was confirmation enough that I'd made the right choice by stepping back. That night, I forced myself to eat a small dinner and tried to focus on a novel, though the words blurred before my eyes. At just past 11, my doorbell rang. An unusual occurrence in my quiet neighborhood, especially so late. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. To my shock, Nathan Kennedy stood on my porch, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression strained. When I opened the door, the raw emotion on his face stopped any greeting I might have offered. "Mrs. Wright," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry to come unannounced like this. I know it's late, but I had to. I needed to." His composure crumbled completely. "I've made a terrible mistake." I guided Nathan into the living room, his tall frame seeming smaller somehow as he sank onto the couch. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted the cup of tea I offered, a reflexive hospitality, despite my confusion and lingering hurt. "I drove straight here from Boston," he explained, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. 6 hours on the road. I couldn't just call. This needed to be face-to-face. The clock on my mantel ticked loudly in the silence between us. I waited, allowing him the space to gather his thoughts, though questions burned inside me. Was Sophia okay? Had something happened beyond our painful conversation? "Sophia doesn't know I'm here," he finally said, as if reading my concern. "She thinks I'm at a late business meeting." He winced at his own words. Another lie in what's becoming a pattern I hate. I leaned forward slightly. "Nathan, what's going on?" He set down his teacup, meeting my eyes with unexpected directness. "I overheard your conversation with Sophia yesterday. About the wedding." He swallowed hard. "About you not being welcome to speak. About you not attending at all." My chest tightened. That was a private discussion between my daughter and Me? I know, he acknowledged. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. We share an office space in our apartment, and I came home early. His expression clouded. When I heard what was happening, I was too shocked to announce my presence. And then it just kept getting worse. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mrs. Wright, Sophia told me you decided not to attend the wedding because you disapproved of our relationship. She said you couldn't accept her new life and were making impossible demands. The blood drained from my face. That's absolutely false, I whispered. She uninvited me. She made it clear my presence would complicate her perfect day. I know that now, he said grimly. I heard everything, and it wasn't the first lie I've caught recently. I processed this revelation slowly, the pain of Sophia's deception compounding the original wound. Why would she misrepresent our conversation? To you? Nathan's laugh held no humor. To maintain the narrative she's created, the one where she's graciously embracing her bright future while managing her less sophisticated past. The assessment stung despite its clinical accuracy. And you believed her? That I would abandon my only child's wedding out of pettiness? Shame crossed his features. Not entirely, which is why I came home early yesterday. Something felt off. He shook his head. The Sophia I fell in love with talked about you constantly. Your strength, your creativity, your sacrifice. She showed me the Mother's Day cards she made you in elementary school that you'd kept all these years. The woman I heard on that phone call yesterday wasn't the Sophia I know. His words released a fresh wave of grief. That was the daughter I recognized too, the one who valued sentimentality and genuine connection over appearances. What's happened to her? I asked, the question more rhetorical than directed at Nathan. But he answered anyway, his voice heavy with responsibility. My mother happened, our world happened, and I let it happen. He pressed his palms against his eyes. God, I've been so blind. I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. The clock continued its steady rhythm, marking time in a life suddenly unmoored from everything familiar. It started gradually, Nathan continued, dropping his hands. Little comments from my mother about Sophia's charming background, always, with that tone that makes it sound like an obstacle overcome rather than something to be proud of. He grimaced. Suggestions about how Sophia might adjust her wardrobe or speech patterns for company events. Introductions that emphasized her academic achievements but conveniently omitted her family details. My heart ached thinking of Sophia, navigating these subtle degradations alone. At first, Sophia would laugh about it with me privately, he said. We'd roll our eyes at my mother's thinly veiled classism. But then, he trailed off, searching for words. Then she started to change. I finished for him. He nodded. It was like watching someone slowly erase themselves. She stopped challenging my mother's suggestions, started adopting her mannerisms, her vocabulary, began referring to her childhood as quaint or humble beginnings, phrases my mother uses about anyone who didn't summer in the Hamptons. I thought about Sophia's increasingly polished appearance, her shifting accent, her new hesitance to mention our small-town life. Signs I'd noticed but minimized, not wanting to seem oversensitive. Why didn't you say something? I asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. If you saw it happening? Nathan accepted the rebuke with a slight nod. At first, I told myself it was just Sophia adapting, finding her footing in a new environment. Everyone code switches to some degree, right? He sighed. Then I convinced myself she was happy with the changes, that they were her choice, that maybe the real Sophia was the one emerging now, not being erased. His self-justifications sounded hollow even to him. I could see it in his expression. But after hearing that call, he continued, after hearing her dismiss you so coldly, watching her lie to me about it afterward, I finally recognized what's really happening. He looked up, his eyes haunted. She's becoming my mother. Or, at least, the version of herself she thinks my mother wants, and I've been complicit in allowing it to happen. The assessment was brutal, but accurate. I thought of Victoria Kennedy's perfectly calibrated condescension, her practiced smiles. That never reached her eyes. The thought of my warm, authentic daughter transforming into that hollow shell made me physically ill. I don't understand how it happened so quickly, I said. Sophia has always been so secure in herself, so grounded. Nathan hesitated before answering. I think it's because she loves me, he said quietly. She convinced herself that fitting into my family's expectations was the price of admission to our life together. And instead of reassuring her that I loved her exactly as she was, I accepted the modified version because it was easier. The painful truth hung between us. In the silence that followed, I noticed the family photos still spread across my coffee table from the night before, evidence of my lonely vigil through memories. Nathan's gaze followed mine, landing on a picture of teenage Sophia in her paint-splattered art room smock, arms thrown around my shoulders, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. He reached for the photo, studying it with a pained expression. This is who I fell in love with, he said softly. This authentic, joyful person who talked about her amazing mother who taught art and encouraged creativity and worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. He set the photo down carefully. Not someone who would cut you out of her wedding to satisfy my mother's vision of propriety. I felt tears threatening again. What happens now? Nathan straightened, a new resolve evident in his posture. That's why I came. I need your help, Mrs. Wright. I need to get Sophia back, the real Sophia, before we both lose her completely. The request was unexpected. I'm not sure she wants my help, Nathan. She's made her choice quite clear. No, he said firmly. She's made my mother's choice. She's not thinking clearly. The woman I want to marry wouldn't treat her mother this way. His certainty was touching, but overlooked a painful reality. Sometimes people change, Nathan. Maybe this is who she truly wants to be now. He shook his head emphatically. I don't believe that. And I don't think you do either. He leaned forward. Last week I found her crying in our bedroom closet, holding a quilt you made her in high school. When I asked what was wrong, she said she was just tired from wedding planning. But I knew it was more. She's homesick for her real self, Mrs. Wright. The image pierced my heart. Sophia hiding away with a tangible piece of her past, grieving privately for what she was sacrificing. It offered a glimmer of hope that my daughter wasn't entirely lost to this new persona. What exactly are you proposing? I asked cautiously. First, I'm postponing the wedding, he said with surprising determination. Tomorrow morning, I'm telling both families we need more time. No negotiation. I raised my eyebrows. Victoria won't take that well. A wry smile crossed his face. No, she won't. But I've spent 30 years letting my mother orchestrate my life. That ends now. His expression softened. I love Sophia too much to marry her when she's lost touch with who she really is. And I respect you too much to proceed with a wedding that dishonors your relationship. His sincerity was palpable, but doubts remained. Postponing the wedding might create space, but it doesn't address the underlying issue. Sophia is making these choices, however influenced she might be by your mother. You're right, he acknowledged. That's why I need your help with the second part of my plan. He took a deep breath. I want to bring Sophia here, to Mapleton, for a month. Away from Boston, away from my mother's influence, away from the pressure of Kennedy expectations. I want her to reconnect with her roots, with the community that shaped her. He gestured around the modest living room. With the home and mother she's being convinced to erase. The proposal was bold, almost old-fashioned in its simplicity. "And you think Sophia will agree to this?" "I think she needs it more than she knows," he said. "When I tell her why I'm postponing the wedding, that I want to marry the authentic woman I fell in love with, not someone shaped by my mother's prejudices, I believe she'll understand." His confidence seemed naive given Sophia's recent behavior, but I couldn't deny the appeal of his plan. The thought of having a month to reconnect with my daughter, to remind her of who she was before the Kennedys, was powerfully tempting. "And if she refuses?" I asked, needing to consider all possibilities. Nathan's expression grew solemn. "Then I'll have my answer about whether we should be getting married at all." The stark ultimatum surprised me. "You'd call off the engagement?" "I don't want to," he said honestly. "I love Sophia, the real Sophia, more than anything. But I won't build a life with someone who's abandoned their core values and family to become what they think I want." He met my gaze directly. "That's not love. That's performance, and neither of us deserves that half-life." His integrity was unexpected and moving. I began to understand what Sophia had originally seen in him, beneath the privilege and pedigree. A fundamental decency that his mother's social engineering hadn't managed to eradicate. "When would this month in Mapleton happen?" I asked, beginning to consider practical details. "As soon as possible," he said. "I can work remotely for a few weeks. Sophia has vacation time accumulated." He hesitated. "That is, if you're willing to have us." "I understand if this is too much to ask after how she's treated you." The question gave me pause. Could I open my home to my daughter after such rejection? Could I set aside my hurt to help her find herself again? The maternal instinct answered before my wounded pride could intervene. "She's my daughter, Nathan. My door is always open to her, no matter what's happened between us." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you," he said simply. "I was hoping you'd say that. But," I cautioned, "this won't work if she feels ambushed or manipulated. She needs to choose this reset herself." "Agreed," he nodded. "I'll be completely honest with her about my concerns and why I think we need this time. The decision will be hers." As we continued talking, formulating approaches and contingencies, I found myself warming to Nathan in a way I hadn't during our previous, more superficial interactions. Beneath the polished exterior was a young man grappling sincerely with difficult questions about authenticity, family influence, and what truly matters in building a life together. Around 1 a.m, I offered him the guest room, unwilling to send him back on the long drive to Boston in his exhausted state. As I provided fresh towels and a spare toothbrush, he paused in the hallway, looking at the photographs that lined the wall, a visual timeline of Sophia's childhood. "Mrs. Wright," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. Regardless of what happens with the wedding, or even with Sophia and me, you deserved better than this. No mother who raised a daughter with such love should be treated as disposable." The simple acknowledgement of my pain, so long dismissed by Sophia, released something tight within my chest. "Thank you for seeing that," I managed. He nodded solemnly. "I'll make this right if I can. I promise you that." After he retired to the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea and processing the evening's unexpected developments. Nathan's appearance had shifted my perspective in ways I was still absorbing. The hurt remained, but alongside it now bloomed a cautious hope that perhaps all was not lost. Not my relationship with Sophia, and not the daughter I'd known and loved for 27 years. I also found myself reflecting on Nathan with newfound respect. It couldn't be easy to recognize the toxic influence of his own family, much less to confront it so directly. His willingness to postpone a wedding his mother had invested months planning showed a courage I hadn't previously attributed to him. Perhaps there was more substance beneath the privilege than I'd allowed myself to see. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight and the smell of coffee. Nathan had risen early and was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, typing rapidly. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee maker. "I thought you might need this after our late night." "Thoughtful of you," I acknowledged, pouring myself a cup. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected," he admitted. "There's something peaceful about this house." I glanced around the modest kitchen with its outdated appliances and hand-sewn curtains, so different from the Kennedy mansion Sophia had described. It's not fancy, but it's home. "It feels like a real home," he said with surprising emphasis. "That's rarer than you might think." We shared a quiet breakfast as Nathan outlined his immediate plans. He would drive back to Boston today, have an honest conversation with Sophia about his concerns, and propose the month in Mapleton. Regardless of her response, he would announce the wedding postponement to both families. "My mother will assume it's cold feet or pre-wedding jitters," he said, spreading jam on toast. "Let her think that for now. It's easier than explaining the real issue." "And what about Sophia?" I asked, the question that had kept me awake much of the night. "What if she chooses Victoria's vision over reconnection?" Nathan set down his knife, expression serious. "Then I have some difficult decisions to make. But so does she." He hesitated. "Mrs. Wright, may I ask you something personal?" I nodded, cautiously. "If Sophia refuses to come here, refuses to acknowledge what she's doing, will you still attend the wedding if she reinstates your invitation?" The question cut to the heart of my dilemma. Would I accept a token inclusion to maintain appearances? Would I set aside my hurt to witness my only child's marriage, even knowing she'd been willing to exclude me? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The mother in me says yes, that I'd endure anything to be part of her important moments. But the person in me, the woman who deserves basic respect." I trailed off. Nathan nodded in understanding. "For what it's worth, I think both answers would be valid. There's dignity in either choice." His validation was unexpected and touching. As he prepared to leave, gathering his overnight bag and checking his phone for messages, I found myself genuinely hoping he would succeed in reaching Sophia, not just for my sake, but for hers. The woman she was becoming under Victoria's influence seemed destined for a hollow existence of perpetual performance. At the door, Nathan surprised me with a quick, awkward hug. "Thank you for listening, for not throwing me out when you had." "Every right to." "Thank you for caring enough about my daughter to fight for her authentic self," I replied. "Not many would make that effort." He smiled ruefully. "Loving someone means wanting them whole, not convenient." With that insight lingering in the air, he departed, leaving me alone with tentative hope and lingering uncertainty. Whether his mission would succeed remained to be seen, but his effort alone had restored something I'd nearly lost: faith that Sophia's true self still existed beneath the veneer she'd adopted. The next 72 hours unfolded like a slow-motion anxiety dream. I heard nothing from Nathan or Sophia, though I knew confrontations must be occurring, painful truths being spoken. I returned to my teaching job, moving through my days with outward normalcy while inwardly braced for whatever might come. On the third evening after Nathan's visit, my phone rang just after dinner. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, sending my heart into my throat. I answered with forced composure. "Hello?" Silence greeted me, then a shaky breath. "Mom?" Sophia's voice sounded smaller than I'd heard it in years. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said, sinking into my armchair. "I'm listening." Another pause, filled with unspoken emotion. "Nathan told me he came to see you." "Yes," I confirmed, offering nothing more. This conversation needed to be led by her. "He postponed the wedding," she continued, her tone unreadable. Told everyone we needed more time to prepare. His mother is. She gave a humorless laugh. Not pleased. I imagine not, I said neutrally. More silence stretched between us, heavy with all that remained unsaid. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice breaking. I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. The raw confession cracked something in my carefully maintained composure. Oh, sweetheart. I look in the mirror and don't recognize myself, she continued, words tumbling out faster now. My accent, my clothes, my opinions, they're all calibrated for approval from people who will never truly accept me. And the worst part is, I did it to myself. No one forced me. Influence doesn't require force, I said gently, especially when it comes from people whose acceptance you crave. She let out a small sob. I've been horrible to you. Unforgivable. Not unforgivable, I corrected softly. Hurtful, yes. Disappointing, yes. But never beyond forgiveness. How can you say that after what I did? After I uninvited you from my wedding? After I let Victoria convince me that your presence would somehow diminish the event? The pain in her voice was real, but so was my own. Because I'm your mother, Sophia. That doesn't change, even when you push me away. Nathan wants us to come stay with you, she said after a moment. To get away from Boston, from the wedding pressure, from his family's influence. He says I need to remember who I am. What do you want? I asked, the essential question that had been overlooked for too long. The line went quiet again. When she finally spoke, her voice held a clarity that had been missing in our recent interactions. I want to come home, Mom. I want to remember who I was before I started believing I needed to be someone else to be worthy of love. Relief and joy surged through me, though I tempered my response. Then come home, sweetheart. Your room is waiting for you. Just like that? She asked incredulously. After everything I said? Everything I did? Loving someone doesn't mean... They never hurt you, I said, echoing wisdom my own mother had once shared. It means you create space for repair when they're ready to try. Her soft crying was the only sound for several moments. We'll drive down this weekend, she finally managed, if that's okay. I'll make up both beds, I assured her. And Sophia, I'm proud of you for this choice. It takes courage to examine yourself this honestly. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, processing the conversation's unexpected gift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Sophia's identity crisis wouldn't resolve in a weekend or even a month. There would be difficult conversations, painful recognitions, likely backsliding. And questions remained about the wedding, about her relationship with Nathan, about whether she could find a middle path between rejecting her past and being consumed by his family's expectations. But she was coming home. She had named her struggle and chosen to face it. That was a beginning, fragile and precious and real. As I moved through the house, preparing for their arrival, I found myself thinking about identity and its malleable nature. We all adapt to new environments, adjust to meet expectations, evolve as we encounter different worlds. The key seemed to lie not in refusing to change, but in distinguishing between growth that expands who we are and transformation that erases essential parts of ourselves. Sophia had lost that distinction somewhere along the way, seduced by the glossy perfection of the Kennedy world and the validation that came with successful assimilation. But something in her, something core and true, had refused to be completely overwritten. That resistance gave me hope that the daughter I knew still existed beneath the carefully constructed facade. As I changed sheets in the guest room, I noticed a framed photo on the nightstand, Sophia and me at her college graduation, arms wrapped around each other, faces alight with pride and possibility. I picked it up, studying our expressions, searching for signs of the fracture to come There were none visible. Just genuine joy and connection between a mother and daughter who believed their bond was unbreakable. Perhaps that certainty had been naive, but the feeling itself had been real. I replaced the photo carefully, a silent invitation for Sophia to remember that connection when she arrived. Whatever happened next, whether the wedding proceeded with adjustments or was canceled entirely, whether she found a way to balance her past and future or had to make more difficult choices, we would face it together. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time since that devastating phone call, it contained possibility. Sometimes that's all we can ask for, the chance to begin again, to reclaim what matters most, to remember who we are beneath the layers of who we've pretended to be. As night fell over my quiet neighborhood, I felt something settle within me. Not quite peace, but its precursor. Hope. My daughter was coming home to find herself. And in welcoming her journey, perhaps I would rediscover parts of myself too. The strength, the resilience, the capacity for forgiveness that motherhood had taught me over 27 years of loving Sophia through every iteration of her becoming. The Friday evening they were scheduled to arrive, I found myself moving through the house with nervous energy, adjusting pillows and rearranging flowers, small, meaningless tasks to occupy my hands while my mind raced with uncertainty. What version of my daughter would appear at my door? The Sophia I'd raised and loved, the polished, Kennedy-approved version who'd dismissed me so coldly, or someone caught painfully between those identities? I'd prepared comfort foods from Sophia's childhood, my homemade lasagna that had fueled countless study sessions, the cinnamon apple crisp that had become our tradition for celebrating good news. Simple dishes with no pretension, but laden with memory and meaning. Food that said, "Welcome home," without words. At 6:43 p.m., headlights swept across my living room wall as a car pulled into the driveway. I resisted the urge to rush to the door, giving them a moment of privacy for whatever conversation or preparation they might need. Through the window, I watched their silhouettes in the car, heads bent toward each other, hands gesturing in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Finally, they emerged, Nathan retrieving bags from the trunk while Sophia stood motionless, staring at the modest house she'd grown up in as if seeing it with new eyes. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find my daughter looking simultaneously familiar and foreign. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the sleek blowout she'd adopted in recent months. She wore jeans and a sweater rather than the designer outfits that had become her uniform, but her posture remained stiffly formal, her expression guarded in a way that had never existed between us before. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, uncertainty making her voice waver. We stood frozen in that liminal space, neither strangers nor the effortlessly connected mother and daughter we'd once been. Behind her, Nathan waited respectfully, bags in hand, allowing us this moment without intervention. I made the first move, opening my arms without expectation or demand. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Something crumbled in her carefully maintained composure. With a small sound that was half sob, half sigh, Sophia stepped forward into my embrace. As my arms closed around her, I felt the tremble in her shoulders, the way she clung to me with surprising desperation. We stood that way for a long moment, saying nothing, the physical connection speaking volumes that words couldn't yet express. When we finally separated, her cheeks were damp, her makeup slightly smudged. She wiped at her face with an embarrassed laugh. "Sorry, I promised myself I wouldn't cry in the first 5 minutes." "Tears are allowed in this house," I reminded her, the familiar phrase from her childhood bringing a flicker of recognition to her eyes. Nathan stepped forward then, setting down the bags to offer me a quick, respectful hug. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Wright." "Eleanor, please," I corrected gently. "I think we're beyond formalities at this point." That first evening unfolded with careful navigation of unspoken boundaries. We ate dinner together, conversation focusing on safe topics, My students' latest art projects, traffic on their drive from Boston, the unusually mild weather for February. Sophia remained quiet, contributing brief responses when addressed directly, but otherwise watching our interactions with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. After dinner, as Nathan insisted on helping with dishes, Sophia wandered into the living room. I found her there a few minutes later, standing before the wall of family photographs, arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. "You kept all of these up," she observed without turning. I moved to stand beside her, giving her space while remaining present. "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" She shrugged slightly. "I don't know. I guess I thought, after our conversation about the wedding, you might have wanted to take them down." "Those photos aren't conditional, Sophia. Neither is my love for you." Her hand reached out to touch a particular frame, Sophia at 16, paint splattered and beaming beside. A mural she'd helped design for the children's hospital. "I was so proud of this project," she said softly. "Remember how the kids would touch the butterflies for good luck before their treatments?" "I do," I affirmed. "You spent weeks getting those butterfly wings exactly right. Said they needed to be perfect because those children deserved magic." She turned to me then, eyes shining with unshed tears. "What happened to that girl? The one who cared about bringing magic to sick children?" The vulnerability in her question broke my heart. "She's still there, sweetheart. Just buried under expectations and compromises that accumulated so gradually, you didn't notice the weight until you were crushed beneath them." She nodded slowly, returning her gaze to the photographs. "Victoria has a wall of family photos too," she said after a moment. "All professionally taken. All color-coordinated by season and outfit. Not a single genuine smile among them." The observation hung between us, neither of us stating the obvious comparison. Instead, I simply stood with her, allowing the visual evidence of our authentic, imperfect, joy-filled life together to speak for itself. Later that night, after Sophia and Nathan had retired to their respective rooms, my insistence on separate accommodations a mother's prerogative they'd accepted without protest, I sat on my back porch wrapped in a blanket against the February chill. The night was clear, stars puncturing the darkness with ancient light. I found myself thinking about journeys, how we navigate away from and back to ourselves, how the path is rarely straight, how sometimes we must get desperately lost before we can find our way home. The sliding door opened behind me, and Nathan stepped out, also wrapped in a blanket. "Mind some company?" he asked hesitantly. I patted the chair beside me in invitation. We sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching our breath form small clouds in the cold air. "She's afraid," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid you won't forgive her. Afraid she can't find her way back to who she was. Afraid of disappointing everyone, including herself." I nodded, unsurprised by his assessment. "Fear is a powerful motivator for pretending. I imagine you understand something about that too." He gave a soft, humorless laugh. "More than I'd like to admit. I've spent most of my life performing the role of Kennedy heir apparent, so convincingly I sometimes forget it's not actually who I am." His candor invited reciprocal honesty. "Who are you then, Nathan, when you're not playing that role?" He considered the question with genuine reflection. "I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm someone who values authenticity over appearance, someone who wants to earn his own way rather than coasting on family connections, someone who fell in love with Sophia because she saw me, really saw me, beneath the Kennedy name and expectations." "And now?" I asked gently. "Now I'm terrified that I've lost that person, both in her and in myself." He turned to face me directly. "That's why this month is crucial, Eleanor. Not just for Sophia to rediscover herself, but for me to remember why I wanted to break free of my family's script in the first place. for us to figure out if what we have is real or just mutually reinforcing performances. His self-awareness was impressive and unexpected. Perhaps I had underestimated this. Young man, seeing only the privilege and not the prison it sometimes created. It won't be easy, I warned. Identity crises rarely resolve themselves neatly or quickly. I know, he acknowledged, but the alternative is living a lie, building a marriage on foundations that will eventually crumble because they aren't true to who we really are. As he spoke, I heard echoes of Richard's practical wisdom, his insistence on authenticity, even when it was uncomfortable. My late husband would have appreciated Nathan's determination to face difficult truths rather than hide in comfortable illusions. You should get some rest, I suggested as the night grew colder. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. He nodded, rising from his chair. At the door, he paused. Thank you, Eleanor. Not just for having us here, but for raising a daughter who, at her core, values truth enough to recognize when she's lost it. After he disappeared inside, I remained on the porch a while longer, contemplating the unexpected allies and obstacles in the journey ahead. Victoria Kennedy would not easily relinquish her influence. The wedding industrial complex they'd set in motion wouldn't simply dismantle itself. And most significantly, Sophia's internal struggle wouldn't resolve through mere geographical relocation. But tonight, under the vast indifference of stars, I allowed myself to feel the first genuine stirrings of hope that something precious might be salvaged from the wreckage of recent events. The first week of their stay unfolded with careful navigation of unspoken boundaries. Sophia spent much of her time in quiet observation, as if reacquainting herself with the physical spaces of her childhood. I'd often find her sitting in the window seat where she used to read, or standing in her old art corner in the basement, fingers trailing over paintbrushes long dried and canvases left unfinished when she departed for college. Meanwhile, Nathan established a work routine in a corner of the dining room, laptop and papers spread across the table as he conducted video calls and managed whatever Kennedy Enterprises responsibilities he couldn't fully escape. I appreciated his effort to maintain a low profile in the house, giving Sophia and me space while remaining supportive. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on their 6th day, when I returned from school to find Sophia in the kitchen, flour dusting her clothes, hands deep in cookie dough. Snickerdoodles, she explained with a small, tentative smile. I suddenly remembered how we used to make them whenever I was upset about something. I set down my teaching bag, moved by this tangible connection to our shared past. Your dad called them comfort cookies, I recalled. Said no problem looked as bad after cinnamon and sugar. She nodded, blinking rapidly. I've been thinking about Dad a lot this week, wondering what he would make of everything. I moved to wash my hands, then joined her at the counter, falling into our old rhythm of shaping dough into balls and rolling them in cinnamon sugar. He had a gift for seeing through pretense, I said carefully. But he also understood the pressure to conform, to secure your place in the world. Would he be disappointed in me? She asked, the question emerging small and vulnerable. I considered my answer thoughtfully, wanting to honor both her need for reassurance and the seriousness of recent events. I think he would be sad that you felt you needed to erase parts of yourself to be accepted. But disappointed? No. Your father understood that growing up means making mistakes, sometimes painful ones. This was more than a mistake, she said, eyes fixed on the cookie dough in her hands. I was cruel to you, Mom. Deliberately cruel. Yes, I agreed. Simply, you were. My honesty seemed to surprise her. Perhaps she'd expected immediate absolution, a motherly dismissal of her actions. Instead, I continued shaping cookies, allowing the weight of her acknowledgement to rest between us. I don't know how to make that right, she finally admitted. I don't think you can, exactly, I said gently. Some actions leave marks that don't completely fade. But you can move forward differently. You can choose who you want to be from this point on. She was quiet for a long moment, methodically rolling dough balls in cinnamon. That's what scares me most, she finally confessed. I'm not sure I know how to choose anymore. For so long, I've been making decisions based on what would please others. Nathan's family, my professors, potential employers, anyone I thought had power to judge or accept me. When did that start? I asked, genuinely curious about her. Perspective. You were always so independently minded as a teenager. She considered the question seriously. I think it began at Westlake. I arrived feeling so provincial. Everyone else seemed to have traveled internationally, attended prestigious prep schools, spoken multiple languages. I felt like an imposter with my public school education and small-town background. You never told me that, I said softly. I didn't want you to worry. Or worse, to think I was ungrateful for everything you sacrificed to get me there. She slid a tray of cookies into the oven, setting the timer with practiced precision. So I started watching the other students, how they dressed, how they spoke, what they valued. I became a chameleon, adapting to whatever environment I found myself in. And it worked, I observed. Too well, she agreed ruefully. By senior year, I'd perfected the art of becoming whatever version of myself seemed most acceptable in any given situation. Meeting the Kennedys just accelerated the process. We continued baking in companionable silence, the familiar activity, creating a safe container for difficult truths. When the first batch emerged golden and fragrant, we each took a warm cookie, the taste simultaneously sweet and spicy, just as I remembered. These taste like home, Sophia said quietly, eyes closed as she savored the flavor. Because they are home, I replied. Not the physical house, but the feeling of being authentically yourself without fear of judgment. She opened her eyes, meeting mine directly for perhaps the first time since her arrival. I want that feeling back, Mom. I'm just not sure I deserve it after what I did. Worthiness isn't earned, Sophia. It's inherent. You deserve to be your authentic self because you exist, not because you've behaved perfectly. As we continued baking, something subtle shifted between us. Not full reconciliation, but a crack in the wall that had formed. That evening, all three of us sat in the living room after dinner, the plate of snickerdoodles on the coffee table serving as tangible evidence of beginning restoration. I had a call with my mother today, Nathan announced, his tone carefully neutral. She's pressing for a new wedding date. Sophia tensed visibly, cookie halfway to her mouth. What did you tell her? That we're taking the time we need and we'll set a date when we're ready, not before. His expression softened as he looked at her. I also told her that when we do reschedule, things will be different. Your mother will be giving a speech. At the reception, the ceremony will reflect both our family's traditions, and the planning will be a collaborative process, not a dictated one. Sophia's eyes widened. How did she take that? Nathan's laugh held little humor. About as well, as you'd expect. There were references to family tradition and appropriate standards. But I held firm. That couldn't have been easy, I observed, impressed by his resolve. He shrugged slightly. Easier than I expected, actually. Once I started speaking my truth, it felt liberating. He reached for Sophia's hand. I realized I don't want to begin our marriage with my mother's vision overshadowing your voice, or Eleanor's. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. I'm not sure I deserve that kind of support after how I've behaved. It's not about deserving, Nathan echoed my earlier sentiment. It's about truth. And the truth is, the wedding we were planning wasn't authentic to either of us. It was a performance designed to satisfy external expectations. As they continued talking, I witnessed a new dynamic between them, more honest, less performative. Nathan appeared genuinely committed to creating space for Sophia to rediscover herself, while simultaneously examining his own complicity in the dynamics that had led them here. Later that night, after Nathan had retired, Sophia lingered in the living room, curled in the same corner of the couch she'd favored as a teenager. "Can I ask you something, Mom?" she said hesitantly. "Anything." "How did you and Dad maintain your authentic selves? I mean, there must have been pressures, expectations from others." The question revealed how deeply she was reflecting on the patterns in her life. "We had a rule," I explained, settling into the armchair across from her. "Never make significant decisions based on what others might think, only on what aligned with our core values." "That sounds simple but impossible," she observed. "It wasn't always easy," I acknowledged. "When your father was offered that promotion that would have required us to move to Chicago, the prestige and money were tempting, but it would have meant uprooting you during a difficult year, me leaving a teaching position I loved, and him traveling constantly. We asked ourselves, does this align with our values of family connection, meaningful work, and community involvement? The answer was no, so he declined." "I never knew about that offer," Sophia said, surprised. "It didn't seem relevant to share once the decision was made. But looking back, I'm grateful we had that framework for making choices. It served as a compass when external pressures tried to pull us off course." She was quiet for a moment, contemplating. "I'm not sure I even know what my core values are anymore. I've spent so long adapting to others' expectations that I've lost track of what matters most to me." Rather than offering platitudes or immediate solutions, I simply nodded. That's a brave acknowledgement, and an important starting point. Values aren't discovered overnight. They emerge through reflection, through paying attention to what brings you genuine fulfillment versus what simply brings external validation. Our conversation continued late into the night, touching on memories, regrets, and possibilities. Though nothing was definitively resolved, I sensed Sophia beginning the essential work of sorting through the accumulated layers of performance to rediscover her authentic core. The following days brought subtle but significant shifts. Sophia began spending mornings in her old art corner, initially just organizing supplies, but eventually sketching tentatively in a dusty notebook she'd found. Nathan took on cooking dinner several nights a week, revealing a genuine enthusiasm for learning family recipes that had sustained us through difficult times. Most meaningfully, Sophia began reconnecting with the community that had shaped her. We visited her former art teacher, now retired but still creating vibrant ceramics in her home studio. We stopped by the children's hospital where her butterfly mural still graced the walls, now somewhat faded but still bringing joy to young patients. We had coffee with her high school friend Jenna, who had stayed in Mapleton to run her family's garden center and was raising 2 young children with her wife. These encounters seemed to serve as anchors, reminding Sophia of the values and connections that had formed her foundation before the pressures of conformity had eroded them. I watched her gradually relax into these interactions, her speech patterns shifting back to their natural cadence, her laughter becoming more genuine. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into their stay, Sophia asked if we could visit Richard's grave together. The 3 of us walked through the small community cemetery as sunset painted the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. At Richard's simple headstone, Sophia knelt to place the wildflowers we'd gathered earlier that day. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, fingers tracing the engraved letters of his name. "I wish you were here to help me figure things out. Mom's doing her best, but you always had a way of cutting through the noise to what really mattered." I stood slightly apart with Nathan, allowing her this private moment with the father she'd lost too young. As we watched, she continued speaking quietly to the headstone, occasionally wiping tears from her cheeks. The raw vulnerability of her grief, not just for her father, but perhaps for the authentic self she'd buried, moved me deeply. Later, Walking back to the house in contemplative silence, Sophia suddenly reached for my hand, squeezing it the way she had as a child seeking reassurance. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to." The gesture and words, though small, felt monumental in their significance, a tender bridge being rebuilt across the chasm that had formed between us. Not complete restoration, but the beginning of something honest and new. As our third week together began, I sensed we were entering a new phase of the journey, one where difficult truths could be spoken more directly, where genuine healing might take root in the fertile soil of honesty and accountability. The road ahead remained uncertain, with Victoria's influence still a shadow on the horizon, and deep identity questions still unanswered. But watching Sophia sketch at the kitchen table, her hair pulled back carelessly, Nathan beside her reviewing work documents but pausing occasionally to admire her drawing with genuine interest, I felt something like peace settle over me. Not because everything was resolved, but because the process of authentic reconnection had begun. And in that moment, I understood that sometimes the most powerful form of love isn't perfect acceptance or unlimited forgiveness, but rather the courage to create space for someone to find their way back to their truest self, even when that journey involves pain, accountability, and the dismantling of carefully constructed facades. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since that devastating phone call where Sophia had uninvited me from her wedding, I believed in the possibility of something more meaningful emerging from the ashes of what had been lost. Not a return to the past, but the creation of something new, a relationship grounded in honesty rather than performance, in genuine connection rather than obligation. As the fourth week of Sophia and Nathan's stay approached, a subtle but significant transformation had taken hold in my modest home. The initial tension had gradually dissolved into something more authentic. Not perfect harmony, but genuine connection growing in the fertile soil of honesty and shared purpose. Sophia had begun painting again, setting up an easel by the bay, window where morning light streamed in. Her first few attempts had been hesitant, technically precise but emotionally restrained, as if she were still judging her creative expression against some external standard. But by the 18th day, colors had begun exploding across her canvases. Bold oranges, defiant purples, unapologetic reds, the visual language of someone reclaiming their voice. The phone call that disrupted our fragile peace came on. Tuesday morning. I was at school teaching when my phone vibrated repeatedly in my desk drawer, multiple calls from the same number in quick succession. When I checked during my planning period, I found 6 missed calls from Victoria Kennedy. I stared at the notification, my stomach tightening. Victoria had never called me directly before. Whatever prompted this urgent communication couldn't be good. After a moment's hesitation, I returned the call, stepping into the empty art supply closet for privacy. She answered immediately. "Finally," she said, her voice crisp with barely contained irritation. "I've been trying to reach you all morning." "I'm teaching, Victoria," I reminded her. "What's the emergency?" "The emergency," she replied, emphasizing the word with subtle mockery, "is that my son and your daughter have been hiding in your little town for nearly 3 weeks. The wedding vendors are threatening to cancel without additional deposits. The venue is pressuring us about confirming the date. The situation has become untenable." I took a slow breath, reminding myself that engaging with her combative tone would only escalate tensions. Nathan and Sophia needed time to reconsider some aspects of their relationship and the wedding. I'm sure they've communicated that to you. What they've communicated is vague nonsense about finding themselves and authentic relationships. What they're doing is being irresponsible and childish. This retreat to your influence has gone on long enough. The implications in her carefully chosen words were clear. In Victoria's view, I was the problem, the unsophisticated, small-town mother whose very existence threatened the polished narrative she'd constructed for her son and his fiancé. "Victoria," I said evenly, Sophia and Nathan are adults making conscious choices about their futures. I haven't kidnapped them or brainwashed them. They're here because they chose to be. Please, she scoffed. Sophia was perfectly content with our wedding plans until Nathan made this impulsive decision to postpone. Now suddenly she's questioning everything we've carefully arranged. I find the timing suspicious, don't you? I leaned against the supply shelf, paint bottles and brushes surrounding me, tools of creative expression that had always provided clarity in confusing moments. What exactly do you want from me, Victoria? I want you to stop encouraging this regression, she said bluntly. Sophia was evolving into someone who could navigate our world successfully. Now she's retreating into childish patterns, painting, like a college student, and reconnecting with people who can offer her nothing beneficial for her future. The dismissive assessment of my daughter's authentic joy struck me like a physical blow. Those childish patterns, as you call them, are actually Sophia rediscovering her genuine passions. The people she's reconnecting with shaped her into the remarkable young woman Nathan fell in love with in the first place. That's a charming perspective, Victoria said with artificial sweetness. But the reality is, the Sophia who first caught Nathan's attention was a college phase, a stepping stone. Marriage to my son requires someone who can handle the responsibilities and appearances of Kennedy life. She was making excellent progress until this detour. The stark articulation of what I'd long suspected, that Victoria viewed Sophia as raw material to be molded rather than a complete person to be respected, momentarily left me speechless. When I found my voice again, it emerged with quiet intensity. My daughter is not a project to be completed, Victoria. She's a human being with inherent worth that has nothing to do with how well she performs for your social circle. How quaintly egalitarian, she replied. But we both know, society doesn't operate on inherent worth. It functions on presentation, connection, and appropriate behavior. I'm offering Sophia entree into a world of privilege and opportunity most people can only dream of. What exactly are you offering her? A lifetime of mediocrity in a forgotten town? The question was designed to provoke insecurity, to make me question whether my defense of Sophia's authenticity might actually be limiting her potential. For a fleeting moment, it worked. What if Victoria was right? What if my values of authenticity and personal integrity were luxuries that wouldn't serve Sophia in the competitive, connection-driven world she aspired to enter? But as quickly as the doubt surfaced, clarity followed. I thought of Sophia's recent emergence from the performative shell she'd constructed, the genuine laughter I'd heard echoing through the house, the passionate discussions she and Nathan were having about creating a life based on shared values rather than appearances, the return of the creative spark in her eyes when she painted without self-consciousness. What I'm offering her, I said firmly, is permission to be herself, to build a life and potentially a marriage based on authenticity rather than performance. That's not mediocrity, Victoria. It's integrity. Her laugh was cold and dismissive. Integrity doesn't secure board positions or charitable committee appointments. It doesn't open doors or create opportunities. Perhaps not in your world, I acknowledged, but it does create genuine happiness and meaningful connections. Things I suspect you know little about. The personal observation crossed an unspoken boundary. Victoria's voice hardened. I'm coming to Mapleton tomorrow. This situation has dragged on long enough. I've allowed this little sabbatical, out of respect for Nathan's process. But my patience has limits. The wedding will proceed as planned, with or without your blessing. Before I could respond, she continued, I've booked a suite at the Mapleton Inn. I expect to meet with all of you tomorrow evening. We will resolve this situation like adults, not hide away from responsibilities like children playing house in the suburbs. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me standing amid art supplies, heart racing with a mixture of indignation and apprehension. Victoria's impending arrival threatened the delicate progress of the past weeks. Her formidable presence and practiced manipulation could easily overwhelm Sophia's nascent reconnection with her authentic self. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Sophia and Nathan in the backyard, heads bent together over sketches spread across the old picnic table. February had yielded to early March, bringing unusually mild weather that had coaxed early crocuses through the soil. They looked up as the screen door closed behind me, both smiling with an ease that had been absent when they first arrived. "Mom!" "Perfect timing," Sophia called. "We're designing potential layouts for a community garden at the Children's Hospital. Remember how I always talked about expanding the butterfly project to include healing plants?" The enthusiasm in her voice made Victoria's imminent arrival all the more concerning. I set my teaching bag on a chair, considering how to deliver the news without casting a shadow over their evident joy. "That sounds wonderful," I said, joining them at the table. "The project suits you both, Nathan's business acumen and your artistic vision working together for something meaningful." Nathan nodded, his expression animated. "It's exactly the kind of initiative I've wanted to spearhead at Kennedy Enterprises. Projects with tangible community benefits rather than just PR value. My father might actually support this direction, even if my mother—" He stopped abruptly, noticing my expression. "What's wrong, Eleanor?" I sat down, facing them directly. "Victoria called me today. She's coming to Mapleton tomorrow. She's booked a room at the inn and expects to meet with all of us tomorrow evening." The transformation in their demeanor was immediate. Sophia's shoulders tensed, her hand instinctively moving to smooth her hair, a habitual response to anticipated judgment. Nathan's jaw tightened, the carefree enthusiasm replaced by wary calculation. "What exactly did she say?" he asked, voice carefully controlled. I related the conversation as accurately as possible, neither softening Victoria's dismissive assessment nor exaggerating her demands. They deserved the unvarnished truth to prepare adequately for tomorrow's confrontation. When I finished, a heavy silence settled over the picnic table. The sketches, vibrant with possibility moments earlier, now seemed fragile against the looming reality of Victoria's influence. "She can't just arrive and expect to dictate what happens next," I said finally. "You're both adults with agency and choice." Sophia stared at her hands, now clasped tightly in her lap. "You don't understand how persuasive she can be, Mom. How she can make something sound perfectly reasonable while she's systematically dismantling your confidence." "I think I got a taste of it during our phone call," I said gently. "But remember, you're not facing her alone this time. You have support here." Nathan reached for Sophia's hand, his expression resolute. "We knew this confrontation was coming eventually. Maybe it's better to have it now, when we've had time to reconnect with what matters to us." "What if I can't maintain that clarity?" "When she's actually here?" Sophia asked, vulnerability raw in her voice. "What if I slip back into performing for approval the moment she walks in?" The fear was legitimate. Victoria's presence would test the strength of Sophia's emerging reconnection with her authentic self. It would challenge Nathan's commitment to creating a relationship based on mutual values rather than familial expectations. "Then we'll remind you," I said simply. "That's what family does. Holds up a mirror to reflect your truest self when you've momentarily forgotten." That evening, we prepared for Victoria's arrival like soldiers readying for battle. Not with weapons, but with truth and boundaries. Over dinner, we discussed specific concerns and potential responses. Nathan shared insights into his mother's typical manipulation tactics, analyzing them with the clinical precision of someone who had spent a lifetime observing and navigating them. "She'll bring gifts, expensive, thoughtfully selected items designed to create a sense of obligation," he explained. "She'll compliment things insincerely to establish artificial common ground. She'll reference shared experiences that exclude you, Eleanor, to create an us versus her dynamic. And throughout, she'll frame everything as reasonable concern rather than control. How do we counter those strategies? I asked, impressed by his awareness but concerned about practical application. By naming them as they happen, Sophia suggested, surprising both of us with her assertiveness. By saying, explicitly, "This feels like an attempt to create obligation," or, "I notice you're excluding Eleanor from this conversation." Nathan smiled at her with evident pride. Exactly. My mother's tactics work primarily when they remain unacknowledged. Bringing them into the open neutralizes their power. As the conversation continued, I observed a strength developing between them, not the glossy perfection Victoria had cultivated, but something more resilient, a partnership based on mutual support and shared values. This was the foundation that could withstand tomorrow's test, if they maintained their clarity and courage. Before bed, I found Sophia in her childhood bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the collection of photographs on her dresser. Unlike the rest of the house, this room had remained largely unchanged since her high school years, a preserved capsule of her authentic self before the pressures of conformity had begun eroding her identity. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to the space beside her. She nodded, making room on the quilted bedspread we'd selected together for her 16th birthday, a colorful array of fabrics representing different phases of her life. "I'm terrified," she admitted as I sat down. "Not just of Victoria, but of myself, of my capacity to abandon my values when faced with disapproval." The honesty was itself evidence of growth. 3 weeks earlier, she would have hidden such vulnerability beneath polished confidence. "Fear is a natural response to someone who has successfully manipulated you in the past," I said. "But awareness creates choice. You see the dynamic now in ways you didn't before." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said about Dad, how you made decisions based on core values rather than external validation. I've been trying to identify my own values, the non-negotiable principles that should guide my choices." "And? What have you discovered?" She smiled faintly. "That authenticity matters more to me than approval. That creative expression isn't a hobby to be discarded, but essential to my well-being. That relationships should expand who I am, not diminish me." "Those sound like powerful anchors," I observed, "the kind that can steady you in turbulent waters." "I hope so," she whispered, "because Victoria Kennedy is a Category 5 hurricane when she wants something." The next day passed with tense anticipation. Sophia alternated between determined preparation and momentary panic. Nathan made several private phone calls, his voice occasionally rising with uncharacteristic firmness. I cleaned the house, not from any desire to impress Victoria, but as a meditative activity to center myself before the coming confrontation. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I answered to find Victoria Kennedy on my porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my teaching salary. Behind her, a visibly uncomfortable Harold Kennedy offered an apologetic smile. "Eleanor?" Victoria greeted me with practiced cordiality. "How quaint your home is. I can see why the children find it a charming retreat from reality." The condescension was so expected it almost made me smile. "Victoria, Harold, please come in." They entered my living room with the cautious assessment of anthropologists studying an unfamiliar culture. Victoria's gaze swept over family photographs, handmade artwork, and comfortable but worn furniture with barely concealed judgment. "Where are Nathan and Sophia?" she asked, remaining standing despite my gesture toward the couch. "They'll join us shortly," I replied. They wanted a moment to finish a conversation privately. Her eyebrow arched slightly. "How convenient." Before tension could escalate further, Nathan and Sophia appeared from the back porch, hands linked in silent solidarity. The transformation in their demeanor from this morning was remarkable. Where anxiety had dominated, resolve now shone. They had the steady presence of people who had made important decisions and were prepared to defend them. "Mother, father." Nathan greeted them with respectful firmness. "Thank you for coming." Victoria moved to embrace him, but he maintained enough distance to prevent it, instead gesturing toward the seating area. "Let's sit and talk directly about why you're here." The subtle assertion of control clearly surprised Victoria, whose practiced smile flickered momentarily. As everyone settled into chairs and couches, I observed the careful positioning. Sophia and Nathan together on the couch, Victoria and Harold in adjacent armchairs, me slightly removed in the window seat. The physical arrangement reflected the relational dynamics at play, alliances and separations visually manifest. "Well," Victoria began with forced brightness, "this has been quite the extended vacation. I trust you've both had sufficient time to work through whatever temporary concerns prompted this retreat." "It wasn't a vacation, Mother," Nathan corrected calmly. "It was an intentional pause to reevaluate priorities and authenticity in our relationship." Victoria waved dismissively. "Semantics. The point is, the wedding vendors are becoming impatient. We need to set a firm date and proceed with the plans we've invested so much in already." "That's actually what we want to discuss," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. "Nathan and I have made some decisions about our future." Victoria's posture stiffened, sensing opposition. "What sorts of decisions?" Nathan took Sophia's hand, their fingers intertwining with natural ease. "First, we are still getting married. Our commitment to each other has only strengthened during this time." Relief visibly washed over both Kennedy parents, though Victoria quickly masked it behind practiced poise. "However," Sophia continued, meeting Victoria's gaze directly, "we will not be proceeding with the wedding as previously planned. We're canceling the arrangements at St. Thomas and the Greenwich Country Club." The statement landed like a grenade in the carefully arranged living room. Victoria's composure fractured, genuine shock breaking through her polished veneer. "That's absurd," she finally managed. "The deposits alone, the connections we've leveraged, the guests who have already been verbally invited." "We understand the practical implications," Nathan interrupted smoothly, "and we'll handle them responsibly. I've already spoken with Father's assistant about reimbursing any non-refundable deposits from my personal accounts." Harold Kennedy, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward slightly. "Son, if this is about asserting independence, there are less dramatic ways to make your point. Perhaps we could compromise on certain aspects while maintaining the core elements." "It's not about compromise, Dad," Nathan said with surprising gentleness. "It's about authenticity. The wedding we were planning wasn't a reflection of who Sophia and I truly are or what we value. It was a performance designed to meet external expectations, primarily mothers." Victoria's face flushed with indignation. "That is unfair and untrue. Everything I suggested was for your benefit, to ensure the wedding met the standards expected for someone of your position." "And that's exactly the problem," Sophia interjected, her voice stronger now. "Those standards required erasing significant parts of myself, my background, my creativity, my family." She glanced at me with genuine remorse, including my mother, who deserves to be centrally involved in her only daughter's wedding. I felt a surge of pride at Sophia's clarity, at her willingness to name the painful truth without flinching. This was the daughter I'd raised, thoughtful, direct, and ultimately guided by integrity rather than approval-seeking. Victoria turned to me, eyes narrowing. "I see your influence has been quite effective these past weeks." Before I could respond, Sophia cut in firmly. "My mother hasn't manipulated me, Victoria. She's simply created space for me to remember who I actually am, something that became increasingly difficult under your guidance." The direct confrontation clearly surprised Victoria, whose carefully constructed narratives rarely faced such straightforward challenge. She regrouped quickly, however, shifting tactics with practiced agility. "Darling," she said to Sophia with manufactured warmth, "no one is suggesting you abandon your charming origins, but marriage into the Kennedy family comes with certain realities. Nathan has responsibilities, expectations, a legacy to uphold. Surely you don't want to complicate his position within the family business." The implied threat that Nathan's professional future could be jeopardized by their decision hung heavily in the air. But instead of creating the intended anxiety, it seemed to strengthen Sophia's resolve. "I want a partner who values authenticity over appearance," she said clearly. "If Nathan's position depends on my performance of someone I'm not, then perhaps that position isn't worth having." Nathan nodded in agreement. "Mother, I've already discussed this with Father. My role at Kennedy Enterprises should be based on my capabilities and contributions, not on how well my wife performs according to your social standards." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Your mother means well, son. She's simply concerned about your future." "No," Nathan contradicted with respectful firmness. "She's concerned about appearances. There's a difference." Victoria stood abruptly, smoothing her immaculate suit. "I can see this conversation is pointless while you're both under this influence." She cast a dismissive glance at me. "When you're ready to discuss realistic options rather than indulging in this temporary rebellion, you know how to reach us." Nathan remained seated, his posture relaxed but resolute. "We're not coming back to Greenwich until we've planned our wedding our way, Mother. And when we do return, our relationship will function differently. I won't allow you to manipulate Sophia or dictate our choices." "Allow," Victoria repeated incredulously. "I am your mother, Nathan." "Yes," he agreed, simply. "But I'm an adult making conscious choices about the life I want to build. You can either support those choices or create distance between us. That's your decision to make." The directness of the boundary seemed to momentarily stun Victoria. She turned to Harold, clearly expecting him to intercede, but he merely shrugged with unexpected equanimity. "The boy has a point, Victoria," he said mildly. "Perhaps we should listen rather than dictate." Victoria's carefully constructed control visibly crumbled in the face of this unexpected alliance. For a brief moment, genuine emotion flashed across her features. Not anger, but something more vulnerable. Fear. Fear of losing influence. Fear of change. Perhaps even fear of losing connection with her son. In that fleeting instant of authenticity, I felt an unexpected flicker of compassion for her. Victoria's relentless focus on appearances and control likely masked deep insecurities, a realization that didn't excuse her behavior, but helped explain it. The moment passed quickly as she reassembled her composure. "This discussion isn't over," she said with forced dignity. "We'll return to our hotel and continue tomorrow when everyone has had time to reflect more rationally." As the Kennedys departed, Victoria rigid with displeasure, Harold lingering to shake hands warmly with each of us, a profound sense of victory permeated the room. Not triumph over Victoria specifically, but something more meaningful: the successful defense of authenticity against the powerful currents of conformity and performance. After they left, the three of us stood in momentary silence, processing the confrontation and its implications. Then Sophia began to laugh, not with mockery or bitterness, but with genuine relief and perhaps a touch of disbelief at her own courage. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually stood our ground." Nathan embraced her, his expression reflecting both pride and liberation. "We did, and it felt right. Scary, but right." I watched them with a full heart, recognizing that while the journey ahead still contained challenges, a crucial corner had been turned. My daughter was finding her way back to her authentic self, not unchanged by her experiences, but strengthened by the conscious choice to integrate rather than erase her past. Later that evening, as Sophia and Nathan walked to the corner market for ice cream to celebrate their successful stand, I sat on the porch swing, contemplating the day's events. The confrontation with Victoria had demonstrated the power of clear boundaries and shared values against manipulation and control. But more importantly, it had revealed Sophia's developing resilience, her capacity to recognize unhealthy dynamics and choose a different path. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, I found myself reflecting on the nature of parenthood itself. My role had never been to prevent Sophia from making mistakes or experiencing pain. Rather, it was to create a foundation solid enough that when inevitable storms came, she could find her way back to what mattered most. Today, I'd witnessed the strength of that foundation, tested but ultimately unbroken by Victoria's formidable influence. The wedding that would eventually take place, whatever form it might take, would be authentic to who Sophia and Nathan truly were, not a performance designed to satisfy external expectations. And I would be there, not as a reluctant guest, relegated to the background, but as the mother of the bride, speech in hand, heart full with the privilege of witnessing my daughter's journey toward a life of integrity and genuine connection. In the end, the uninvitation to Sophia's wedding had led to something far more valuable than any ceremonial role could offer. A profound reconnection between us based on truth rather than performance, on mutual respect rather than obligation. From the painful catalyst of rejection had emerged a stronger, more authentic bond, proving once again that our most difficult challenges often contain within them the seeds of unexpected growth and renewal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.